Thank you. All right, we're coming to you live from Moscow, and a teenager has reportedly been killed in clashes between police and protesters in Bahrain. Like Libya, the Gulf state is marking 2 years since the start of its own uprising. The demonstrators say their demands to end discrimination and release all political prisoners have just been ignored. Let's get more on this now from London-based Bahraini activist Dominic Kavakeb, here joining us live on the programme. All right, good to see you today. So, on the second anniversary of your uprising, any highlights, any positive achievements so far?
Well, realistically, we're looking at 2 years in which we've seen no reform. We've seen nothing change. I mean, we started this uprising 2 years ago, and on that day, the first martyr of the uprising was killed. And now 2 years later, on the same date, the 14th of February, another teenager has been killed today. And this really shows and displays the lack of reform, the continuous human rights abuses, the continuous repression taking place on the streets of Bahrain.
Now, we've certainly seen violent crackdowns against political activists. The opposition is currently holding reconciliation talks with the Sunni rulers. Any chance, you think, of a peaceful resolution?
Well, I think that was certainly what we hope for. I mean, it's good that dialogue has come back on the agenda and that there is discussions happening. But it seems that this latest escalation of security against the people is going to possibly put that in jeopardy. As I say, we hope that these talks can lead to a peaceful solution, because the only way that Bahrain can move on from this and towards a democratic outcome is through a peaceful solution. But at the moment, it's hard to judge with what we've seen happening today. But
do you think the ruling family itself really has genuine intentions going into these negotiations, or is it just a part of trying to appease the violence and protests?
Well, I think the ruling family, there's more than one idea within the ruling family. I think, of course, there are those who simply want to please the international community to say, look, we're having this dialogue and, isn't that a great thing, whilst continuing the violations on the street. But at the same time, I think there are those who understand the need that the country will only move forward with a real meaningful dialogue. I mean, the people have come out on the streets time and time again saying that they won't go home. They simply will not go home until there's reform. And I think the fact that they've stayed out for 2 years clearly proves that. So the only solution is through a dialogue, and I think the regime has to realise that.
Do you think that they'll also realise that the human rights groups continue and have been calling now for the past couple of years on the Bahraini authorities to release all prisoners of conscience? Do you think they'll get their fingers into that muddy water or not?
Again, it's another area that we don't know exactly what the regime is thinking, and it was deeply concerning on the 7th of January that they upheld the life sentences against these opposition figures. A lot of people thought that perhaps they were going to be released, and in fact, Obama about a year and a half ago said that there can only be a meaningful dialogue if these political prisoners are released. He said, how can you have a dialogue whilst opposition figures are in jail? So, this is another thing that, really needs to happen. You've got people serving life sentences simply for freely expressing their opinion, whilst torturers and human rights violators are walking free on the streets of Bahrain.
Well, of course, I mean, we all know very well about the prominent human rights activist Nabil Rajab. He was jailed for 3 years, basically, for inciting anti-government protests with his online speeches. What about the Western nations, though, Dominic? I mean, the Western nations, they've been taking a strong stance against human rights violations in other countries. Have they done the same, do you think, in Bahrain?
No, of course they haven't to the same level or to the same degree, and it is deeply worrying that they continue to not necessarily remain silent, but to not use the sort of pressure that they can use. I mean, this has been going on for 2 years, and every single time a major violation happens, the international community or international governments might come out and say this is a bad thing. But what are they really doing? How are they really applying pressure on the Bahrain government to begin the process of reform? That's not clear. And there really isn't enough public statements, and there's not enough public pressure being put on Bahrain, and they feel like they're immune and they can essentially do what they want without any real backlash from the international community.
All right, London-based Bahraini activist Dominic Kavakeb, thanks for coming on RT today.